Hey guys, Chris Granrud here with Rainy Days Guide Service, JT Outdoor Products. I'm with Captain Chris Zahn, and we're down here on the Rainy River, and we're having this kind of a fun event here. We've actually taken all of the JT rods, and we're trying to catch fish on every single one of them. So some of the rods aren't designed in particular for how we're having to use them to catch these fish right now, but we thought it'd be kind of fun to kind of go through all of our different rods and just kind of talk about how we utilize them through the guide season. To start with, I'll talk about our 7.3 JTX MAG light, and for me it's actually one of my favorite rods. I think it's one of my most versatile rods, and how I'm going to typically use this rod through the season is going to be a jig and minnow bite or a jig and crawler bite for me. So I'm a pretty firm believer that if you get into a bite where you have a sensitive fish or a pressured fish, maybe it's during a bug hatch or it's middle of the day fishing, whatever it may be, a lot of times on that initial take of the bait, they'll feel the tension of that rod and they'll drop the bait. So for me, when it comes to a jig and minnow bite, or like a jig and shiner bite, Chris, that we had this summer on the Canadian side where they were really full fish, on that initial bite, I think they grabbed that back of the minnow.
Before the hook.
Right?
Before the hook, definitely.
So they actually have to take that bait a little bit. So a lot of times on a typical medium light rod or a medium rod, whatever, they'll actually grab that bait and they'll push that bait back out of their mouth. Where that 7.3 light, it's got a little bit of a slower action. So the big buzz in the fishing industry is always fast action. You want to have a fast action rod. I actually believe that's not true a lot of the times.
No. Not on that jig and minnow, like you're talking, how it grabs just that back part, and you need them to pull on it a little bit, and you don't want them to feel it, you know.
So for the guys that are fishing any kind of a pressured fish at all, if you're fishing a jig and minnow or a jig and crawler or a jig and leech, what have you, and you find that fish is blowing that bait out of the mouth too quick, the 7.3 light is a fantastic rod for that kind of bite, and that's typically how I use it, and I use it a good part of the season.
You know, yep, and exactly, that one does it also, but also that's Panhandler is kind of the same setup and the same thing. We have that 6.9 and the 7-foot Panhandler.
6.6.
Oh, 6.6,
yep.
sorry, yeah. And the 7-foot Panhandler, and it's the same kind of thing. It's the same concept. It grabs that. We use these, and they're very sensitive, and it grabs half down the bait. And we use it the same way with these light. They're both sensitive rods like that. But I will tell you one thing too. It's a killer crappie rod. When this first came out, me and Granrud here were fishing for some some crappie there, and I had the medium light, which is an awesome rod, but we're sitting there and he was up 2 touchdowns on crappie from me. 2 touchdowns.
Just for the record,
literally.
That's like a full 14 fish.
Yeah.
Like, so,
You know?
so to be clear, yeah, 14.
14. Okay, yeah, 14 to 1, I think it was. Oh yeah, I didn't get one. I stuck one in there. But you know, we only had the one in the boat, so you know, we arm wrestled for it, and I ended up getting it away from him. So
Imagine that.
Yeah, and what happened after that? I think it was 3 touchdowns, and that's 21. So I got 3 touchdowns, so 21 to 14. You might have squeaked in 15 there.
I probably didn't go 21-0 down there. I think I maybe scored a but it's a great point. I mean, obviously the Panhandler has been designed for panfish.
But what it was is we couldn't feel that bite with the other one. They were grabbing it so quick and spitting it, But this Panhandler, we put it out there, and you could actually feel that just enough of a bite where you could set the hook and you could get it. And it's because of this light rod and stuff. With the medium light, even just medium light, how sensitive that is, we still could not feel it. By the time you felt the boom, they were spitting it. And this thing, that day, and it was, I always have at least 3 in my boat now because of that. You know, and yeah, it's a very good rod though.
When you look at a high-end panfish rod, it's something that I hear a lot of times. Like, why would I spend a couple $100 on a panfish rod? Am I going to catch more fish? Ask Chris.
Yeah.
He's down 14-0. You're absolutely going to catch more fish. The trick is when it comes to panfish, and when you're fishing crappies, whether you're fishing them up on Rainy Lake or you're fishing them in southern Minnesota, what have you, that bite is always the same. It's a very, very light bite. And what a panfish or a crappie will do is he'll actually suck that bait in and blow it out in an instant. So you have to be able to rip a hook set very, very fast yet not have too much tension. Because if you rip that as fast as you need to actually hook that fish, and it doesn't have the right tension, it's too loose. You think of it like just a true noodle rod, you can't get a hook into that fish. If it's too much tension on that snap, you're actually going to blow out of that fish. So this carbon blank within this panhandle, this happens to be our 7-foot rod, which is my favorite. The 6.6 is actually a little bit lighter yet, but both those rods are really fantastic, being able to get that quick hook set, detect that really light bite, yet at the same time not be too hard to pull out of the fish or too limber to not hook the fish. So I think it's a perfect design. And I don't want to spend 45 minutes talking about the Panhandler, but I will tell you, before we came out with the 7.3 Mag Light, the Panhandler, when you got into a tough walleye bite, the 7-foot Panhandler caught 90% of the fish in our boat. I mean, literally, I'd have it, last time I started, I'd have the most inexperienced fishermen, I'd have them using the Panhandler in the boat, and inevitably, they were catching the most fish. And what we learned to realize is that those fish would grab that bait, much like our snare rod in the ice fishing season, and they literally couldn't feel that rod. So you'd be able to load that thing up. It'd be real key if you're using a light rod like that to actually load that rod up before you put a hook set in. If you try to snap a hook set into a big walleye with heavy load on there, it's going to be a lot of practice swinging, not a lot of connection.
Yep.
But let's move on to some of the other rods here, Chris.
Well, I got this here. This is one of my favorite rods. Now this is your Black Rain 7.3. And this has got the Tennessee handle on it, and this is one of my favorite rods. I do like this one because of this Tennessee handle, how you can put your reel however you want. If you want it up front, now I like the reel a little bit back, because I do hang on back here, or right here, so my hand's mainly in front of that reel, so I do like it back. But I've seen some people put it right up front like that, and they grab it maybe more back here. But it you can place it, you can turn it a little sideways if you want when you're castability wise on that way. But it's a good versatile rod, and I tell you what, on the river here, when we're on this river and we're in this current, this thing puts a hook in them.
Yeah.
You don't miss many fish on this. Your hookup percentage on this, on the river, it's got the backbone, it's got the drive, and when you set the hook on something, it drives it through. It pierces that upper beak of that walleye, which is very key.
You know, for those of you that aren't familiar with that Tennessee handle, you can see this reel is taped on, right? So for 100 years, we've decided that we needed to have a reel seat. We can take a high-end rod in the ice fishing industry, and we could tape it on or what have you to have that kind of smaller feel in your hand. But the truth of the matter is, unless you can actually adjust your reel on that rod, you can never have truly a balanced rod. So a balanced rod means as you're holding the rod, it's not going tip up or going tip down. It's actually perfectly balanced in your hand. Now there's 100 different reel weights, so depending on where you would put your reel, if you had a reel seat, a lot of times it would be tip up or tip down. It would never perfectly balance. If you're doing a lot of fishing, it can be a little bit more cumbersome, it can be a little more tiring in your hands. So now, based on the reel that Chris has on his rod here, he can balance that exactly where he wants based on taping that reel on. So say for example, we've got a jig wrap on here in this particular presentation. So on a jig wrap, obviously you're ripping that bait up. So you could actually, if it was specifically designed just for the jig wrap, he could actually balance this so it was tip up. So he would have the reel back a little bit so that tip would want to come up in his hand, and it actually promotes that stroke. So it's kind of an interesting concept, and I think I was kind of against it to start with, and now after I put that in my hand, it is actually a lot more comfortable. Mm-hmm. So, but that is the 7.3 Black Rain medium power 7.3. Of course, you can get a little longer cast, you get a little better reach. We're fishing in a current area here where the little better reach I'm talking about, when you're working over rocks, by having a little bit different trajectory, you can actually work over those rocks and you kind of work that bait correctly. So
in the cast a mile, that thing just casts a mile. It's unbelievable.
You know, the first two, I would say, kind of flagship rods that were within our lineup were the 610 and 7.1 JTX medium light. So for me, I will tell you, if you gave me one rod, if I was stranded on an island with a few baits and one rod, I would take the 7.1 medium light there. The 7.1 for me is the most versatile rod. It's a rod that you can vertical jig with if you like to do that. If you like to cast jigs and plastics that I've got on right here, I would be doing that. For me, it's my favorite jig wrap rod. It's forgiving. A lot of times when I work a real aggressive presentation like that, I believe you have to have some forgiveness as well. You're ripping that hook into a fish very, very aggressively. Sometimes if you have a little bit too stiff of a rod, you can actually pull out of that fish. So the 7.1 JTX MAG medium light, really a perfect rod for 100 different presentations. But you give me one rod, I would probably take this one here. Again, all of our rods have a Toray carbon fiber. So why is that important? It's the best carbon in the world, extremely light, strong, great energy transfer. When you look at any of our rods, whether it's our JTX 7.1 or 610, you're going to find a rod that's extremely light in your hand and it's got great energy transfer. So the lighter you can make a rod, the easier it is for you to be able to detect what's happening down the river. You can pick that up in the palm of your hand. So I can tell whether I'm working a jig rep and it's hitting rocks. If I'm coming through
you can feel a leaf come through.
It's like, oh yeah, I just bumped a piece of grass or a leaf, what have you. But you can detect those things, and it's going to be something that's going to help you catch more fish and hopefully less rocks and snags and
See, I know
everything
you
else
like the
out there.
7.1, but I like the 610 just a little bit better. And you know, in the 7.1, they probably cast a little farther than the 610, but I like the feel of this 610 just a little bit better on this medium light rod. For jigging wise and stuff, to me this 610 has the perfect balance. And you know, and it's all personal preference what people like and stuff, but not that 7.1, like I said, it casts a little farther, but to hold this rod, and I could just it has, I think, just a touch more sensitivity to it, I think.
The 610 does. The 610 is going to be it's a little bit more of a finesse rod.
Yep.
So for me, for if I'm jigging over the side of the boat, you know, I mean, I would probably utilize the 610 versus the 7.1. So a little bit lighter, a little more of a finesse rod, if you will. And you know, and the other thing is, you know, I mean, this is what I mean. Chris and I probably won't necessarily agree on every rod. So you're not going to agree on every single rod, and it depends on how you fish. I mean, honestly, some guys are going to be fishing mono, some guys are using braid, some guys are fishing in 4 feet of water, some guys like us in the summer are fishing 35 feet of water. So all that kind of comes into play with really picking out the right rod for you. But I will tell you that we have, I took all my rods out of the boat the other day. It's end of the season for us, and we're bringing rods out of the boat. And my dad took a look at all my rods against the wall. And the old school days was you had like 2 fishing rods, right? You usually had one for pike and you had one for panfish or what have you. And he's like, do you really need all those rods? And I can honestly say yes. Like, honestly, yes, I do need those rods. So, you know, we're down here for this little JT challenge, if you will, where we're catching fish in all the different rods. But I will tell you, when we get through one of the rods that isn't necessarily designed for how we're fishing, we immediately gravitate to the rod that's designed for how we're fishing, because that's the rod that's giving us an advantage. So we're trying to beat that other boat that's over there. I assure you, I want to have the right rod for that presentation. So.